The last week or so has been objectively the worst week so far for Vladimir Putin in 2025. We have seen the spectacular and in the future what is going to be considered legendary spider's web operation by the Ukrainian SBU, and they took out in spectacular fashion somewhere between 15 and 30% of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. Many of those planes were located thousands and thousands of kilometers away from Ukraine itself, from the Ukrainian border, around 4,000 kilometers from here to roughly Irkutsk. And by using drones that they smuggled to their locations near the airfields, using unsuspecting Russian truckers, and then had this Bond-esque scenario where the retractable roofs were withdrawn and these drones popped up into the sky and went to their destination and took out in pretty surgical fashion the various Russian bombers that were parked in the open air on these airfields is quite unprecedented, and probably this will be one of those legendary operations that is talked about in decades to come. On top of that, also some strategic bridges were taken down in Russia. We had another attack on the Kerch bridge. Crimea is just out there behind me. I'm here in Odessa, on the shores of the Black Sea, a city that Russia threatened to invade and capture back in 2022. However, the Black Sea Fleet is long gone from the shores right here in Odessa, and in fact it's hiding somewhere basically in de jure Russia, mainly in Novorossiysk, and perhaps there's some elements of it still stationed in Crimea itself. And the Kerch Bridge is a symbolic and important Russian logistical pathway from de jure Russia into Crimea. Of course, they also have now a land bridge with occupied parts of Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk Oblast that connects Russia to Crimea. However, it would be another big blow. It was struck again. It did not take the bridge down. It did do some damage, and how much damage is done is hard to estimate now because it's probably going to be mainly underwater, and perhaps we'll see another attempt to take it down fully with a weakened bridge. On top of that, Saudi Arabia has announced they're going to push up oil production, which means lowering the price of one of Russia's main exports and one of the main ways that they finance the war. That is the revenues that they receive for their natural resources. Saudi Arabia doing this also complicates the domestic situation for Vladimir Putin, because less money to go around means he's going to have to force the Russian economy to take another hit, and its citizens are going to be maybe actually this time going to noticeably feel poorer in the next 6 to 12 months as a result, if the Russia itself has less revenues coming from its natural resources. So all in all, it's been a terrible week for Vladimir Putin. His prestige and his perspectives to win the Russo-Ukrainian war. That said, how did Vladimir Putin and Moscow responded? Well, they unleashed a terror campaign on Ukraine with unprecedented numbers of drones and missiles from those said strategic bombers in part. Although they have been doing that, they had ratcheted up the number of missile and drone attacks in the preceding weeks. In fact, there's a lot of speculation that those bombers that were here were actually going to be used in a new strike on Ukraine. And it actually took Russia a few more days to respond than normal, because they had to reallocate their resources to cover what had been damaged. Here in Odessa, we had a strike on a maternity hospital just 2 nights ago. Last night was not as heavy as the 2 previous nights, but Kiev saw one of the biggest bombing attempts by Russia since the beginning of the war. Ukrainian air defense held up pretty well under the circumstances. However, Ukrainian authorities are concerned that they will not be able to continue to supply its air defense to the same extent going forward, and that obviously will leave big holes, as we see in other parts of the war where Ukrainian forces were not able to shoot at everything that was incoming because they had to make decisions about what was likely to strike and what was the most important to defend. So overall, it's been a very successful week to 2 weeks for the Ukrainians. the Russians have made a little bit of ground again in the east of the country, take some parts of Sumy Oblast. However, none of that is really that strategic or that important at the end of the day. This war is unlikely to be decided on the battlefield directly. It's more likely to be decided by the willingness of the Ukrainian and Russian sides to continue to fight. And at the moment, that advantage still lies with Ukraine, and the last week or so has seen them been given not just a moral boost, but these strikes deep into Russian territory, but also strategically they have taken out a significant part of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. And the problem is for Russia, they cannot easily replace these bombers, and if they continue in this vein of losing all these hard to replace assets, it means that they leave themselves more and more open to some sort of potential threat in the future, and it questions the value of continue to try to subdue Ukraine if they're going to leave themselves very exposed in other parts of their enormous border, especially with respect to China. So I'll leave on that note. Drop your comments down below. And as always, when we're in this t-shirt, Slava Ukraini, Rom Salva, do Peremogli.